Good afternoon, and welcome to the final virtual candidate debate interview the Daily Freeman is hosting in the run-up to the November 8th election. I am Patricia Doxey, a reporter with the Daily Freeman, and I am joined today by Yvonne Lahara, our senior editor. Today, we're sitting down with Josh Riley, the Democratic candidate for the 19th Congressional District. Josh, thanks for agreeing to sit down with us in this format.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Just as a preface, you are running against Republican Mark Molinaro, who we met with on October 17th, in a district that comprises all or parts of 11 counties stretching from Columbia County in the east to Tompkins County in the west, and includes in our area Columbia, Greene, and the northern half of Ulster County. Because it's just us, I hope that we'll be able to explore in some more depth some of the issues facing the district and the country. So before we get to the question and answer segment, I'd like to give you just about 3 minutes to deliver an opening statement. So if you'd like.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this and for all your coverage of the race. It's been a complicated year, to say the least, given politics and the work you all are doing to make sure that the electorate is informed. Is really, really valuable, and I appreciate it and the chance to be with you. I'll tell you just briefly my background. I have a very typical upstate New York story. My family came here over 100 years ago to work in the local factories. They worked in the shoe factories in my hometown for a long time. They were tanners there, and then we had the IBM factories, and my folks worked there for a long time. Dad was a maintenance worker in the waste treatment plant. And as I was growing up, what I saw was those plants close down and those jobs get shipped overseas. I remember when I was young, I delivered the Presence on Bulletin, the newspaper, to my neighbors in the mornings, and it would often have these headlines about the job losses around town and folks really struggling to get by, people who were sold out and overlooked. And literally on the exact same page of the newspaper, you didn't even have to flip the page. On the exact same page of the newspaper, you would see headlines about corporate profits going through the roof and Wall Street going gangbusters. And so I learned young that our political system and our economic systems are rigged against working folks in upstate New York, and they're rigged in favor of special interests and the politicians they're buying and selling. And so I've spent a lot of my career fighting back. I've been really blessed to have a career that's taken me all over the country. I did civil rights work in the South, representing kids from low-income families who are having trouble getting health care services. Had an opportunity to go to California and serve as a law clerk for a federal appeals judge, where I studied the Constitution, the fabric of our democracy. I served as counsel in the United States Senate, where really proud of the work I did to bring Democrats and Republicans together to get legislation passed to protect survivors of domestic violence from homelessness, to provide more funding for our law enforcement. And finally, I was an attorney in private practice, where one of the cases I took on was a partnership with the National Organization of Women to try to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. I sued insurance companies that were monopolizing the market and raising their rates on small business. I launched this campaign about a year ago, and I'm really excited and proud of the campaign we've built. I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. 70% of the contributions to this campaign are $25 or less. So this is a grassroots, people-powered campaign, and I'm running because we need change. I think the status quo and politics as usual just haven't been working for working folks in upstate New York. So I'm running as a new voice. I'm offering a new vision, new leadership, and really excited to be here with you and looking forward to answering any questions y'all have.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just to start off, as you pointed out, this has been a very complicated election year. It's a midterm election, and there are questions about whether the Republicans will take control, if the Democrats can keep control. If the Republicans do take control of Congress, how do you see yourself being an effective member in a Congress that may not only be controlled by Congress, but could also be populated by a significant number of members who deny that the election was won by Joe Biden?
Yeah, great. I have a track record of bipartisanship. I have a track record of bringing Democrats and Republicans together to get things done. And that's the approach I'm going to take, whether Democrats or Republicans control the House, the Senate, the White House. I'll work with anybody, Democrat or Republican, who's serious about building an economy that works for working people. And this isn't hypothetical for me. I have a proven track record, including in Washington, by the way. And I should note, I actually come from a Republican family. My parents actually just changed their registration to Democrat this summer so that they could vote for me in the primary. It took their kid running for Congress to change parties, but we got him there. In Washington, I worked as counsel in the Senate at a time when the Senate was very narrowly controlled by Democrats. The House was actually controlled by Republicans, and there was a Democrat in the White House. And in that very divided environment, I was able to serve as the lead counsel on legislation that I was able to get through both chambers and eventually signed into law by the president. I wrote an amendment to the Violence Against Women Act that got signed into law. I wrote legislation to provide more funding for law enforcement, and I did that by bringing together the most progressive Democrats in the Senate and a former sheriff who was very, very conservative from Florida. And we worked together and we rolled up our sleeves and we said, we disagree on a lot of things, but let's find common ground. Let's get to work together. And we did that. That's the approach I'm going to take to this job.
Terrific. One of the major issues that have been that has risen as a particularly Democratic issue, but is a major issue facing all candidates in the country is that of abortion.
Yeah.
Can you tell me where you stand on abortion and women's reproductive rights?
Yeah, of course, happy to. And this is a real contrast, I think, with my opponent. He has said time and time again that he believes this question of abortion should be left to the states, and what that means is that it should be left to politicians. I think that's wrong. I fundamentally disagree with that. I'm pro-choice. Our campaign is endorsed by Planned Parenthood. Our campaign is endorsed by the Family Planning Action Fund. Our campaign is endorsed by the National Organization of Women. And it's because I believe that abortion is healthcare, and I believe that women's healthcare decisions are women's healthcare decisions, nobody else's. I do not trust politicians as a general matter. I don't really trust politicians, but especially when it comes to the most intimate and difficult decisions a woman has to make. I don't think the politician has, and the state and the government has any place in the OBGYN's office. So I'm pro-choice, and I trust women with those decisions.
So does that mean that you wouldn't support any limitations put by the state or federal government on abortion?
I trust women to make those decisions. I get really concerned when we trust a bunch of politicians, especially men like me. I have no business drawing that line for a family. Can you imagine? I mean, think about it. I have a 2-year-old son, and I think about when he was born, and he ended up having to spend some extra time in the NICU unexpectedly. These are the most difficult situations for families. You think about a family who wanted nothing more in the world than to be parents, and they've picked a name for their kid, and they've decorated the nursery, and all of a sudden they get news that something has gone wrong. The government doesn't have a place in dictating the outcomes in that situation. I trust a woman, and I trust her doctor to make those decisions.
Do you support that right being codified in federal law?
I really do. I really do. And this is another big difference between my opponent and me. I'm on record very clearly stating one of the first things I will do when I get to Congress is sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act. I'll also work, Pat Ryan, who's become a friend of mine during the course of this campaign. He has a legislation to protect women's access to FDA-approved abortion medications. Pat has been working on that through legislation. I have been working on that issue through litigation. I've been engaged with the Justice Department to make sure that even in a post-Dobbs world, women have access to FDA-approved abortion medications. So I will, and I want to be really clear about this. I will sponsor the Women's Health Protection Act to codify Roe. I think it's really interesting that my opponent, when he's been asked about this, he says, "Well, Congress can't act on that issue." He says this is a state's issue. I think at one point he even said it would require a constitutional amendment to codify Roe v. Wade into law, and that is just wrong. That is just absolutely wrong. As a member of Congress, you got to take a position on some of these things. This is a bill that is in front of Congress and will be in front of Congress, and I'm a yes vote on it, and I want to be clear on that.
Thank you. Moving on to another topic that is on the forefront of most voters' minds this season is the economy. Mm-hmm. There is no question that the economy is in a free fall. Republicans have blamed Democrats and President Biden for runaway inflation that is causing prices on everything from milk to gas to rise. What responsibility do you believe that the president bears for the current climate? And what specifically would you propose, both in the long term, but also immediately, to finally get a handle on this problem and help the American people who are struggling?
Yeah, this is one of the questions I get the most on the campaign trail because it is true. Families are being crushed under rising costs right now, and it's a failure of politics as usual. I think people are sick and tired of all the finger pointing, and what they want are solutions. And so let me tell you what my solutions are that I'm proposing very specifically. I think number one, there's a long-term big picture here that we cannot miss. The rising prices we have seen over the last year or so, I believe, are a direct consequence of really, really bad policies by both Democrats and Republicans that shut down our plants and shipped our jobs overseas. We're seeing bottlenecks at the ports right now, trying to import a whole bunch of things that we used to make here, and that's resulting in rising costs. We need to make things in America again. We need to make things in upstate New York again. It's a central pillar of my campaign, coming from a blue collar, working class manufacturing community. I'm committed to creating new jobs, making things here in upstate New York again. And if we're able to do that, we're not beholden to foreign supply chains. So big picture, long term, we need to think about that. In the short term, there's a number of things we need to do. And some of these are real contrast again with my opponent. I think we need to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Legislation was recently passed to start doing that. There's a lot more work we need to do. I recently published a very specific plan to end what are called pay for delay deals. This is basically where the pharmaceutical industry creates a cartel to keep prices high. We've got to stop those. I know my opponent has been on record against recent federal legislation to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Let's give tax cuts to working families for once, instead of continuing to give tax breaks to hedge fund managers and Wall Street bankers who don't need it. Let's start investing in working families again. And there's a whole bunch of other things we can talk about here. Let me mention just one more. And if you want to talk more about it, other ideas we can. Medicare right now does not cover hearing and dental and vision. And so many seniors that I've talked to are foregoing those services because they can't afford it. Let's strengthen Medicare and let's make sure those services are covered. Basic things like that, we need to do. It's a matter of policies that are focused on working folks instead of special interests. And in the long term, let's start making things in America again.
If I can jump for 1 second, when you say making things, what things should we be making?
Yeah, love this question. Let me tell you a handful of them. Number one. So there's a ton of examples. Let me give you one. If you want me to give you more, I'd love to. Semiconductors. In the last generation, we have gone as a country from making about 40% of the world's semiconductors to the single digits. But semiconductors, you need them for everything from refrigerators, appliances, your phone, everything uses these little chips, these semiconductors. And we used to make those here, and that was great because it was a ton of research and development. It was really, really good jobs, and we controlled that supply chain. And in the last generation, politicians from both sides have sold us out and shipped those jobs overseas where the labor was cheap and the environment was exploited. And that was great for corporate profits. It was terrible for American workers, and it's been terrible for American consumers. So one of the biggest drivers of inflation has been the shortage of chips, because now we have to rely on Asia to get those. And you see these bottlenecks at the ports with us trying to bring those in. Let's make that stuff here in upstate New York. Let's make that stuff down in Poughkeepsie, in Pat Ryan's district, the IBM plant that's being refurbished. We're gonna do that up in Clay, here up near Syracuse. And I'm really excited about what that means for my district, because we're going to have ecosystems built around that with the supply chains and creating really, really good jobs that lift people into the middle class. And we're doing it in a way that I'm so excited about this, because we're doing it in a way that's going to help American people all across the country if we have those supply chains home. I can give you other examples. We could talk about this all day. I'm so excited about it if you wanted me to.
One of the things, and as I'm hearing you, you're talking about bringing jobs back, creating a new economic development environment. Um, that does nothing for the cost of milk today. It does nothing for the cost of gas today. Um, are there steps that can be taken right now
Yeah.
that would enable the American people to see immediate change in this inflation that has got people making just terrible choices that they shouldn't have to make?
Yes, absolutely. And this is why I said, when you first asked me the question, I said there's two things. There's the big picture, long term, and that's what I'm talking about when creating jobs. Look, I'm not telling you we're going to create jobs overnight and it's going to bring
Right.
down costs. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we are going to create the jobs of the future, and it is going to make sure we're not in this situation again, and it's also going to strengthen the middle class. At the same time, the second thing I said is that there are a whole bunch of immediate things that we need to do to lower people's costs and help people make ends meet. It includes things like I support tax cuts for working folks instead of the carried interest loophole and these nonsense tax cuts for Wall Street and hedge fund managers. They don't need it. Working folks across upstate New York need it. That's why I support things like further reducing the cost of prescription drugs. I supported a proposal to do that in Congress. I know my opponent opposed it, but there's more we need to do to lower the cost of prescription drugs. I support strengthening Medicare. I support the recent COLA increases for Social Security so that seniors are making ends meet. I think it's really scary that a lot of Republicans right now, who are, by the way, not just run-of-the-mill Republicans, but folks who are trying to lead the budget committee in the next Congress, they're talking about cutting Social Security. The number of seniors on fixed incomes I've talked to across this district who are terrified of having seen women's rights just ripped away. And now they're saying they're coming for your right to Social Security. So yes, of course, it's a great point. I appreciate you letting me clarify that. It's two things. We got to think big picture, long term. We've got to be ambitious. We've got to be bold. We've got to be optimistic about creating those jobs and building stuff in America. But we also need to provide that immediate relief to working families.
The price of gas is although it's coming down a bit, it really is at what many consider to be an all-time high.
Yeah.
At the same time, people can't afford gas. Um, there's this whole concern about the environment and climate change and the impact of fossil fuels on climate change and on the climate. How do you propose balancing the needs of Americans to be able to afford gas to get back and forth to work and the need to address climate change?
Yeah, I appreciate in that question you described it as a balance because that's what it is. Very often, folks present this as what I think is a false choice between taking the steps we need to take to save the planet and address climate change and making sure folks can make ends meet. I really do think we can do both. So let's talk first about gas prices. What we have seen in this country, and look, this isn't a Democratic issue, this isn't a Republican issue, this is an issue about change versus the status quo, politics as usual versus doing things differently. We've gotten ourselves into a situation with politics as usual where the top handful of oil companies in this country right now are making tens of billions of dollars in profits per quarter. That's profits, that's not revenues, and that's per quarter, that's not per year. $40 billion they just made in the last quarter. At the same time, I'm talking to folks across this district who are canceling the family vacation, they're canceling their trips, they're canceling a night out because they can't afford to fill up the tank. I talk a lot about how our political and our economic systems are rigged against working folks. This is what I'm talking about. It is rigged when you've got the oil companies swimming in cash and you've got folks across upstate New York struggling to get by. And here's why that happens. And again, I'll call out Democrats for this and I'll call out Republicans for this because this is about changing the status quo. The reason that happens is because these big oil companies create corporate PACs and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on corporate PACs and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbyists. And they basically buy and sell politicians, put them in office, and have them keep their prices and profits high, even if it's on the backs of working folks. And so that's why it was so important for me. You know, my opponent's taking corporate PAC money, he's taking corporate PAC money from oil interests. That's not what I'm doing. I'm running a grassroots campaign. Our average contribution, most of our contribution is $25 or less. And I can't wait to go fight the price gouging by the oil companies, because we're seeing it. And I want the Justice Department and the FTC to crack down on it further. I can talk a little bit about the issue with climate change too, if you want me to address the second part of that question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So look, I have a 2-year-old son. I think every day about whether he's going to grow up in a functioning democracy and whether he's going to grow up on a planet that's habitable. I'll tell you, it's a big part of the reason why I'm running for Congress. And I see climate change as one of the most existential threats we are facing right now. And there's a lot of them, but this is one of them. I see it as a challenge, but I also choose to see it as a huge opportunity here in upstate New York, a huge opportunity to revitalize the economy and to strengthen the middle class. Let me give you just one of many examples of what that looks like for me. We have, out of our SUNY system, we have the most breakthrough, advanced, world-recognized technologies with respect to lithium-ion batteries. This is how we are going to save the sun when it's not shining. It's how we're going to save the wind when it's not blowing. If we're ever going to get off of our addiction to oil, especially foreign oil, and start using the sun and the wind, we need this energy storage. And how amazing is it that we developed that technology here in upstate New York? And so what I want to do is take that technology out of the labs in the universities and put it on the factory floors, so folks have good jobs, good wages, good benefits, a clear path to the middle class. And we can all be so proud of what we are building, because we're literally building the things that are going to save the world. And I don't think this is far-fetched. I don't think this is idealistic. I think this is real. And I think this is in keeping with who we are as upstate New Yorkers, because I'm so proud of my deep roots here. And I'm so proud of coming from a family that's worked so hard in the plants for so long, because we've always made the things the world has needed to address the biggest challenges. You know, my generations before me made the boots that our soldiers wore when we trampled fascism. Up in Cortland, Smith Corona, they made the cipher machines that intercepted enemy plots from the Nazis. You know, we made, when somebody landed on the moon, this wasn't some event that happened far away in outer space. It happened in our living rooms, because we in upstate New York made those television sets. Throughout history, what we do in upstate New York is we make the things the world needs. And right now, with climate change, it's a huge challenge. The world needs a lot of things, and I can't wait to make them here in upstate New York.
Do you support nuclear energy as a power source?
I do. I think as we're transitioning to what the economy in the world is going to look like years down the road, I think we need a bit of an all of the above strategy to get us there. We need to make sure that we are transitioning in a way that's ambitious, but also responsible and reasonable.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, Yvonne.
Oh, it's just a bit of a follow-up. What is the landscape of the 19th Congressional District, this sprawling district that we have, look like with all these solar and energy farms? What is it that you're envisioning the district to look like?
Yeah, are you asking me
in terms of because you need a lot of solar panels, right, to create energy, I see
what you're saying. Sorry, I thought you were asking. I thought at first you were asking me a question that I actually get a lot on the campaign trail, which is.
Well, you can answer that question too.
We'll get to that question, I think.
Is this district? It's this, and normally I give people a tour from east to west. I understand what you're asking, which is different. So what I'm not suggesting is that we should just go around and put up wind turbines and solar panels everywhere. That's not the vision. The vision is one where the solar panels and the wind turbines, wherever they are in the United States or whether they're offshore, wherever they are, we've also built the infrastructure necessary to store that energy. So right now, you get solar and you kind of have to use it. It's hard to transmit it. It's hard to store it. what I want to see us do is be the place here in upstate New York that's building the energy storage. So that, let's say there's a ton of solar panels out in Arizona or whatever it is, we are providing them with the batteries they need to save that solar power, and then use it in other places so that you can use it more easily in the winter, for example. Was that what you, was that the, yeah, gotcha.
I think so. So, I mean, that sort of feeds into my next question a little bit. You mentioned the oil companies and the fact that they're making record profits. You talk about upstate New York. Winter's coming
Yeah.
and oil is almost $6 a gallon. Is there anything that the federal government can do, again, in the short term, to help the folks of the 19th Congressional District, many of whom are in sort of that snow belt, kind of the lake effect snow area, maybe a little bit away, but and not close enough that they're going to get impacted. Is there anything that the federal government can do to provide immediate relief for folks who are going to need to heat their homes during this very cold winter?
Yeah, there absolutely is, and just to be clear, we are right in the thick of the snow belt. This new district, we have Cortland County. I'm here in Tompkins County. Grew up in Broome County, and if anybody tells you we're not in the snow belt, I'll tell you. We can have that conversation. I know from a childhood of shoveling the snow. I actually, my wife is actually from Washington D.C. And I remember for the first time I brought her home was in February many years ago. And she said she had never seen so much snow and as big of icicles. So this is real and it's coming. So here's what the federal government can do. I think my opponent likes to talk a lot about state issues. That's fine, but we're running for Congress. Let's talk about federally what we need to do. So there's three things. One, we've kind of already talked about, which is a lot of ways to provide immediate relief to families around a wide range of things. If we're doing things like lowering prescription drug costs, if we're doing things like providing tax cuts to working families, that helps people stretch their budgets and make ends meet. But let's be specific about what's going on with heating and utilities and the like. There's a federal program called LIHEAP. I think it's the Low Income Heating Assistance Program. This is something I've worked on appropriations for in the past as counsel in the Senate. It's one of the major federal policies that provides assistance for folks who need help in the summer with air conditioning, and particularly here in the winter with heating. And right now the program is structured in a way that only about, I think I read a report the other day that said only about 26% of people who actually need that kind of assistance are getting it. And so I'm looking at legislation that would expand that program and strengthen that program so that more folks are eligible for it and more folks are getting the assistance that they need. And one thing I want to do is work with Democrats and Republicans across states, particularly in the North, who are hit with particularly harsh winters, and say, look, we disagree on a lot of things, but let's agree that winters in the North are cold and our folks need some help. And so I think this is an area where expanding and strengthening LIHEAP is a place where there's some bipartisan support. There's another program that I'm looking at, which helps people with winterization. And so that's a longer term, bigger picture thing. But if we're building that infrastructure, by next winter, maybe we have fewer of these problems. But yeah, absolutely. And I'll just mention this too. I think, a lot of people get caught up with the big headlines and all the drama with Congress and with congressional politics. But at the end of the day, the single most important thing that I'll be doing in this job is going to be constituent services. It's something I learned as a staff assistant for Congressman Hinchy many years ago, is that no matter what's going on in Washington with all the votes and all the drama and all the nonsense and whatever, one of the most important things you got to do is have an open door for folks, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to come and get help. And I'm already starting to think about how we're going to build our field program to make sure we're accessible to everybody across this district. And so when folks are having these challenges, we're going to have an open door and a place for them to go to make sure we're getting them all the assistance and the help that they need.
And actually that kind of leads into my next series of questions. In your campaign literature and today, you've talked about your deep roots in upstate New York. Although those of us here would call that Western New York, I think.
This is always
Um,
a point of debate. We could have the conversation about where the line is. Although I think my opponent has now stipulated that New York 19 is where upstate meets downstate, and I think that's right. All of New York 19 in my book, all of New York 19 is upstate, but that's probably a longer conversation.
um, in any event, you have spent much of your adult life living outside of the state and obviously the district, which has led to your opponent, you know, raising issues of whether you're a carpetbagger.
Sure.
Um, how do you respond? Well, let me ask you, how long have you been back living in New York State at full time, and how do you respond to those comments by your opponent?
Yeah, no, this this is great. Look, I'm happy to respond to this. I'm really, really proud of the work that I've been able to do throughout my career, and it's all. Uh, I'm really blessed to have been able to go to college, to have been able to go to law school, and the work that I have done has been informed by growing up in a working class community in upstate New York, where I saw working folks sold out and special interests do really well. All the work I've done is based on that. So, let me give you just a couple of examples. When I graduated from college, the very first job I took was I'd seen so many layoffs and so much unemployment across upstate New York. And so out of college, what did I do? I went to the US Department of Labor. I worked in the Employment and Training Administration, and I worked on unemployment programs to make sure that folks who lose their jobs through no fault of their own have a safety net to fall back on. I worked on job training programs to make sure people are equipped for the jobs of the future. I did that because of my roots in upstate New York. After law school, a lot of my friends, a lot of my classmates went to work for banks on Wall Street. And what I did instead is I partnered with the American Academy of Pediatrics, went to the South, did civil rights work for kids from low income families. A lot of these kids had mom and dad were working 1, 2, 3 minimum wage jobs, and they were having trouble getting health care. I took on that fight because of my roots and my values from upstate New York. Let me give you just one other example here. When I was counsel in the United States Senate, one of the things I'm most proud of having done was brought Democrats and Republicans together to provide funding to fight the opioid epidemic, which had ripped through upstate New York. Some of my high school classmates were killed because of it. I was doing that work in Washington to help upstate New York because this is home for me. And so, look, I'm really proud of the work I've done. I am not the first person from my generation to have gone and had a career getting me the experience I need to hit the ground running, and then want to serve the community that raised me. And this is both sides of the aisle. Kirsten Gillibrand had a lot of national experience and came home to serve. Antonio Delgado had a lot of national experience, came home to serve. On the other side of the aisle, Elise Stefanik spent a lot of time in Washington getting the experience she needed, came home to serve. So I'm really, really proud of the work I've done. It's all inspired by growing up here. And I have to say this, look, if my opponent wants to have this debate about who's a carpetbagger, I think it's fair to ask him, why are you not running in the district where you live, where you work, where the taxpayers are paying your salary? I think it's fair to ask him, if you were as effective in Dutchess County and cared as much about Dutchess County, why are you abandoning it to run in a district where you've never lived a day in your life? So I'm happy to have that conversation.
And I will tell you that I did ask your opponent
Yeah.
if he intends to move into the district that he is running for if he's elected. Um, how long have you lived in this district full time?
Yeah, so I moved back home last year, and of course grew up here, and I've actually lived here most of my life.
And home now is Ithaca.
That's right.
Um, the Ulster County Regional Chamber of Commerce recently held a candidates forum, and I know that due to some scheduling changes or problems, you were unable to attend that forum. Uh, I also did a quick scan of your Facebook page, your candidate Facebook page, and was not really able to find many posts or any posts actually about campaign stops in Ulster County.
Hmm.
Have you been around in Ulster
Yeah.
County? And if you have, where?
Yeah, a ton. And I'd love to give you a list. I know I've been in Ulster County well over a dozen times would be my guess. I was actually just there last week for an event in Woodstock, or actually, sorry, we were in Saugerties. Did an event there with Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Had a really great turnout. We've done a ton of campaign stops across Ulster. And I'm surprised that it wouldn't be on my. I actually don't really follow the social media too much, for better or worse. But yeah, we've done a ton of events. I was in Olive for over the summer for the big festival. I've been to Ulster a number of times for meet and greets, and so yeah, I've been in Ulster a ton.
Great.
I
And
just did
just
another event with Pat Ryan in Woodstock right before his special election, and then did another one a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's been. I've actually probably spent one of the things. I mean, one of the things I've tried to do here, given the nature of this district, is be as present as possible. In the Hudson Valley, because I think this is a challenging time for a lot of voters where redistricting has changed the contours. Folks in the old 19th are now with folks from the old 22nd, the old 23rd. And I think it's really important for me to be on the ground with folks across the entire district. Just in the last weekend alone, we did about 12 events in 2 days. Those events were in Ulster, Columbia, and Greene counties. So yeah,
good.
we're just about everywhere.
And you talk about the fact that this is a sprawling district. It covers 11 parts or all of 11 counties, stretching from the Massachusetts border out into western New York. Hudson Valley, you take in the valley. You've got the Catskill Mountains, and then you've got sort of uh, the more western Broome County, Shenango County. Those lots of different interests, lots of different needs.
Yeah.
What do you see as the similarities and differences between the Hudson Valley and Tompkins County, and how do you represent those different needs in Congress?
Yeah, this is exactly right. The communities across this district each has its own unique challenges, its own unique opportunities, whether it's in Walton, where the water infrastructure is at capacity. And that's become a real challenge in terms of economic development. If it's here in Ithaca, making sure we're preserving the Finger Lakes and not having it exploited. In the Hudson Valley, we are in the midst of a major housing crisis where housing has just become unaffordable. In Endicott, Binghamton, Johnson City, the Triple Cities, where I was born and raised, we've seen some serious issues around job losses and hollowing out of an industrial base. Up in Greene County, there's a lot of communities that I've been talking with who are having some real struggles with respect to clean drinking water and making sure that's in place. In Shenango County, where I've been spending a whole bunch of my time, it's not a place that Democrats go very often. I just spent a bunch of time there over the weekend. Huge issues with respect to high-speed internet and broadband infrastructure. Sullivan County, we've got major issues with access to healthcare, particularly in rural communities. So thing one is, yeah, that's right. Each community has its own needs, and it's really important for me to be on the ground in each community talking about those. But it's also true that there's a lot of things that are issues that affect this entire district. They include things like what we just talked about a bit ago with respect to rising costs, right? That is something that is squeezing working families everywhere. There are issues, many people across this entire district are very concerned about the erosion of our democracy and constitutional rights. I was at Apple Fest in Greene, the town of Greene, which is in Shenango County, a couple of weeks ago. I was there with my wife Monica and my son, and an older gentleman pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, I saw the commercials on TV. I asked him, did you see the good ones or the bad ones?" I think he saw both. And he asked me, he said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." So I talked to him. He said, "Look, Josh, I'm a lifelong Republican. My wife is a lifelong Republican, and you're the first Democrat that we're ever going to vote for because we have granddaughters, and we are concerned because we want them to grow up in a world where they have as many rights." And so some of these bigger issues really do bind all of us and unite all of us. And so my job as a member of Congress is going to be both to focus on the local issues and make sure, we're addressing all of those issues and others that I mentioned. But also some of these national bigger issues are also really important too. And can I say just one other thing on this? Because I think one thing that binds all of this together and is a really fundamental part of my campaign is that a lot of what we just talked about, a lot of what I just told you isn't really Democratic or Republican. It's an issue with politics as usual failing people. And the reason that happens is because any issue that I hear about across this district that folks are telling me, I always ask, what's keeping you up at night? What are you talking about at the kitchen table? And just about in any case, no matter what their answer is to that question, you can draw a direct line from it to the corrupting influence of corporate money in our politics. We're being sold out by politicians who are taking a whole bunch of money from corporate PACs and special interests and then going and doing what's best for them and not for folks here. And that's why it was so important for me to take a pledge that I'll never take any corporate PAC money. I heard the other day about 10% of members of Congress don't take any corporate PAC money. And I'll be so honored if I have the opportunity to be one among them, because for me, this is about fighting for the community that raised me.
Gun violence, just to move on, and I thank you for that. Gun violence has many of our communities feeling under siege. School shootings continue mostly unabated. Do you support an assault weapons ban?
My position on this is the same as Antonio Delgado's. It's the same as Pat Ryan's. I think there's a lot of common sense things we can do to keep weapons of war off the streets and keep our communities safe. The other way that I approach this, obviously, as a dad to a little kid, so much of what's happening in the world today, including this, is heart-wrenching. This is something actually Congressman Ryan and I have talked about. He has a young family around the same age, and you think about it through that lens first and through the lens of public office second. But let me tell you some other experience I have that I bring to this conversation. And I think that's something that I've been trying to share with voters is my real world experience, whether it's working in the United States Senate, working in our federal courts, filing briefs in the Supreme Court. I have experience that's going to allow me to hit the ground running on day one in this job. And this is a really good example. I was counsel in the United States Senate after the massacre at Sandy Hook. And so I was responsible for working on a package of legislation to try to keep our community safe. And I think about it through the lens of my grandpa is an avid hunter. And we have a really, really proud tradition in upstate New York. We can also bring people together to find common ground on things to keep our communities safe. And the package of legislation that I worked on when I was in the Senate, we did polling on it, and it had support from about, depending on the specific provision, had support from about 80% to 90% of American voters. And I think that makes sense. And what happened is that package didn't have the votes to pass. And so you have to ask yourself, in what functioning democracy can a package of legislation have 80 to 90% support from the American people, but not enough votes to get through Congress? And it's a democracy that is dominated by special interests, because what I saw happen was the NRA roll in with millions of dollars, buying politicians, bribing politicians, lobbying politicians, and shutting down proposals that 80 to 90% of Americans supported. And it goes back to what I've been talking about, the corrupting influence of money in politics. And it's why I'm trying to run this campaign.
So what kind of comprehensive approach do you think that the federal government needs to take to address these mass shootings that are terrorizing the nation?
Yeah, a handful of things from that package that I continue to support. Number one, we've got to improve our federal gun trafficking laws. These are the laws that allow us to prosecute illegal arms sales across state lines. You get this argument very often, right, that a city like, I don't know, take Chicago, has the strictest gun laws in the country, and yet the crime there is out of control. That's true. What we found as part of our investigation study when I was on the Senate Judiciary Committee is that a ton of the weapons that are used in those crimes are actually being trafficked up the Mississippi River from other states. And so if we're going to address this issue holistically, we've got to crack down on the gun trafficking. That's thing one. Thing two, the background check system right now is totally broken. We're not getting all the records that are needed into the system, and we're not necessarily checking all of the things we need to check. And there's a long list here. Let me just give you one other. And I think this is actually really important, and I raise it because it is a contrast with my opponent. I worked on legislation when I was in the Senate to make sure that people who are convicted of domestic violence do not have access to firearms. These are people who have had due process and they've been convicted of domestic violence. And the studies show that women are 5 times more likely to be killed if their abuser has access to a firearm. And so I don't think people who have been convicted of domestic violence should have guns. My opponent, as I understand it, voted against legislation that would have disarmed people who were convicted of domestic violence, and so I think that's a really important distinction.
Thank you. Moving on to another topic, again, one that is on the minds of many, and that's immigration.
Sure.
Clearly, our immigration system is broken, and it has been for decades. What do you think needs to be done to solve this issue, which has been a thorny issue for both Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, I hate to go back to my experience, but this is what I'm drawing on in this job. So you remember 2013 was 2012 was when Sandy Hook happened. We worked on a package of reforms in 2013. You may also remember that 2013 was also the year when we had the last comprehensive immigration reform proposal move through Congress. And that moved through the Senate Judiciary Committee. I had an opportunity to work on that. I wrote some of the amendments for that bill, particularly to support survivors of domestic violence who needed safety. And so I think that bill actually provides a really good framework for what Congress should be doing today. And I remind people, I think if my memory is correct, we got like 72 votes in the Senate on that bill, Democrats and Republicans. It died in the House, unfortunately, but it did a lot of things that I would like to see us revive. I'll tell you just a couple of them. Number one, look, maybe I'm not a typical Democrat in this sense, but I think we need more border security. We have got to secure the border. Right now, the flow of illegal drugs and the issues we're having at the border is unacceptable. This is one of places that I've broken with my own party. I do not think we're doing enough to secure the borders, and we need to. Our visa system is terribly broken for farm workers, or for farming across upstate New York, small farms. Right now, the visa program for farmers is so outdated that I've talked to so many farmers here who are having so much trouble getting access to the labor they need. And part of that is because a lot of the visas are seasonal. In the dairy industry in particular, that does not work. You need labor year round because the cows need to be milked year round. And so there are things like that we should improve. But generally, I'm happy to talk.
I do want to know when you say more border security, what does more border security look like to you?
Yeah, it's a combination of both physical and technological barriers to tighten up the border. It's an increase in funding for law enforcement along the border. Our Border Patrol folks are overworked, they're underpaid, they're understaffed, and we should have more folks there. It's increasing the capacity of our administrative and judicial system so that folks can be processed through that system quickly. Look, we need to be able to have an immigration system that honors American values and our leadership in the world and also keeps us safe. I don't think those goals are in tension. I think we do those things together. And I say this, my wife is the daughter of immigrants from India and Ecuador who came here legally and achieved the American dream. And so we can have border security. We can also have an immigration system that honors our tradition as a nation of immigrants.
You mentioned in this your conversation or your discussion about immigration, the flow of illegal drugs.
Sure.
That's another problem facing our country, particularly the flow of illegal fentanyl.
Absolutely.
which my understanding is mostly comes from China.
That's right.
So, what steps do you believe the federal government needs to take to stem the tide of drugs coming in to the country, especially from China?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a this is another place where there's a lot we can do, but one of the things that I'm actually pretty excited about in this as a potential solution is I understand there are new technologies being developed that could that our border and customs folks could use to better and more easily detect the flow of illegal illicit substances coming across the borders. I know there's legislation proposed in Congress, bipartisan legislation. I believe Senator Klobuchar is leading one of the big bills on that, and we should make those investments in those technologies so that we have better way to stop those illegal drugs from coming into our communities. And we have to continue to fund and support our law enforcement. We can do both, make sure that folks who are struggling with addiction and mental health issues have access to the services they need, while also cracking down hard on drug dealers and folks who are trying to import a lot of these substances. So it comes down to funding and support for law enforcement, which I've done throughout my career and will continue to do.
Do you support the federal legalization of marijuana?
Yeah, I do. I think that I'd want to have more conversations with law enforcement and with folks who deal with addiction services to make sure we're doing this the right way. That we have to be thoughtful and deliberate about this. But my general principle around it is that we should decriminalize marijuana usage. I think the war on drugs has been a complete and utter failure in this country. We need to be smart about these things. And look, we have huge challenges we're facing with respect to public safety. And we should be focusing our law enforcement resources in the places where they're most needed and where there is most danger. And so I'm analyzing the specific proposals that are coming out around this, but as a general principle, I would support decriminalizing it.
You mentioned mental health, and that sort of mental health has and the needs for more mental health services kind of permeate a lot of different areas, from crime to drugs to just everywhere. What can the federal government do more to address the needs of those who need mental health services?
There's so much work to be done on this, and it is we're in a crisis across this district. I mean, and part of this I think is because COVID was so hard for so many folks, and then I kind of see the second wave of COVID being the mental health crisis we're facing. One of the things that's been really surprising to me in some ways, as I've been traveling across the district, are folks who you might not expect to say, "Hey, Josh, one of the biggest issues here is access to mental health services." Grizzled, older, blue collar men who are telling me, look, one of my biggest issues is access to mental health care. The situation's gotten pretty dire. And so things we need to do at the federal level include enforcing and effective oversight of the laws that are supposed to at least require parity between mental health and physical health. We need to make sure that if you are dealing with a mental health crisis, you can get access to healthcare in the same way as if you were dealing with a broken leg or a broken arm. A lot of those laws are on the books. Some of them need to be updated and strengthened, and at a minimum, we need to conduct oversight to make sure they're being enforced. I'm actually glad you raised this question because if you've turned on your TV in the last couple of weeks, you've probably seen millions of dollars of dark money super PAC ads against me, portraying me as somebody who I'm absolutely not. And one of the things they did that I think is just really despicable, and I trust voters to see through it. Voters are smarter than the super PACs are giving them credit for. But one of the things they did in these ads is they took a quote that I had during a forum, and they took it out of context. And what I talked about in a forum, I got the same question where I was asked about our mental health system and our criminal justice system. And what I said is that we owe our law enforcement a huge debt of gratitude for the work they're doing. I know this firsthand. My mom has served in law enforcement for nearly 20 years. And one of the biggest challenges that law enforcement has, and when I was working in the Senate, one of the things the National Association of Police Organizations told me and the National Sheriff's Association told me is that they so often are in a situation where they're responding to 911 calls and responding to calls where somebody is having a mental health crisis or somebody is struggling with addiction issues, and they are put in a very challenging position to engage in crisis intervention. And so they asked me when I was working in the Senate, can you work with Democrats and Republicans to come together to provide more funding for crisis intervention training? Can you provide more funding for mental health services in the community? And I was able to bring the parties together and advance legislation to do that. And I was speaking in that forum about people with mental health issues and people with addiction issues, not violent criminals. And unfortunately, the super PACs and the career politicians are doing what they do. It's the old playbook, taking stuff completely out of context and lying about it. But that's been my approach around mental health, and I appreciate the chance to address that.
I want to squeeze one question in, if I could.
Yeah.
You mentioned throughout the interview the influence of corporate money into politics, that there's lobbyists and there's they're dumping millions of dollars to influence campaign. We're in post Citizens United universe. So what can you do to prevent this from happening?
I love this question. This is, we could talk for an hour about exactly this. This is a cornerstone of my campaign. I launched the campaign. I said, I want to do things differently. Folks across upstate New York, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, folks are sick and tired of the status quo. They're sick and tired of being sold out. They're sick and tired of a system that's rigged, where the corporate PACs are taking a whole bunch of money, giving it to the career politicians, and then they're all in cahoots together to do what's best for them, and they're sick of it. And so I said when I launched this campaign, we're going to do things differently, and we have. So the first thing you can do to save our democracy and get the corrupting influence of corporate money out of it, lead by example. I mentioned earlier, only about 10% of members of Congress don't take any corporate PAC money. I'm really eager to join that group of people who are proving that it's a false choice to say you can either do the right thing or the winning thing. I believe that doing the right thing is the winning thing, and it's why I've never taken any corporate PAC money. The other thing, big picture, maybe it's a moonshot, maybe I'm idealistic, but boy, we've got to try to do it. Is a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. I actually, one of the things I'm most proud of from my career was having the opportunity to work on drafting the constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and working on the Senate Judiciary Committee had a subcommittee on the Constitution, and I was able to work on that subcommittee to work on an amendment to overturn Citizens United. So let's do that. There's a host of other ethics reforms that we need in our government right now. Things like, I think we should ban members of Congress from trading stocks. I think we should get rid of partisan gerrymandering. This is a real threat to our democracy. It's creating districts that are very, very blue for the Democrats, very, very red for the Republicans. And what that does is it tears us apart, because it incentivizes people to be extremists. And I'm running in probably the most competitive district in the whole country right now, and I think that's great. I think that's the way it should be, because we have to try to bring people together. I think members of Congress should have to live in the district that they're trying to represent. I think people want somebody from the community representing the community. A whole host of ethics reforms here. One other that I'll just mention quickly, because I think it's really important. The Electoral Count Act is a centuries-old statute that governs the transition of power during presidential transitions, and ambiguities in that statute were exploited by attorneys in the last administration that led to January 6th. And so something like that, we can bring Democrats and Republicans together to get that done too.
All right, thank you. Josh, we're just over our 1 hour limit, so I'd like to give you just a couple of minutes to deliver a closing statement, and then we'll be able to be done for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll keep this very, very quick then. I so much appreciate the opportunity to sit down with both of you. I'm really looking forward to doing it again going forward. The work you all are doing to keep the electorate informed in such a crazy and chaotic election year is really valuable. I would love to invite anybody who's listening, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. I would love you to invite you to join our campaign. I come from a Republican family. I grew up in a neighborhood where most folks are Republicans. I was actually down sitting with one of my old neighbors the other day. He's a lifelong Republican. And I asked him about partisanship. And he said, look, Josh, around here, we're not really Democrat or Republican. We're just equally angry at everybody. And I think there's some truth to that. And so if that fits you, come join our campaign. We are running a campaign about change versus the status quo. If you're really happy with the way things have been going and politics as usual, that's an option on the ballot with my opponent. If you want a new voice, new vision, somebody who's never run for office before and has taken a fresh approach to this, that's what I'm offering. If you want someone who's running a grassroots campaign, people-powered, no corporate PAC money, that's what we're offering. If you want the status quo, I'm probably not your guy. So you can join us at joshrileyforcongress.com. There's a link there to volunteer, to knock on doors, make some phone calls. And now's the time to step up and make your voice heard.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for joining us today. And just as a reminder, early voting begins on Saturday and Election Day is November 8th. Thank you, Josh, for sitting down with us. We appreciate your time today.
Thrilled to do it. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Take care.
Take care now.